So without further ado, let me invite Dr. Attai to the podium to give an introduction and a review somewhat of Dr. Kumar's groundbreaking book. Dr. Attai.
Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be back. I feel almost like deja vu. Having been here in July, I can't believe so much time has flown. I'm really honored, to say the least, to be here to celebrate with my dear friend, co-conspirator, fellow researcher, writer, to also have our mentor here, Professor Kevin. To be celebrating with Dr. Kumar, and this great achievement today. So I just wanted to offer some brief reflections about the book, right? I think it's a very, very moving piece that is very necessary for us to confront the ordinariness of violence as Dr. Kumar theorizes. And in the book, the women, the names that we sit with, whose their experiences will really resonate with us on a deeply personal level. And we might even see reflections of our own lives in their stories as we navigate the contours of the violence that they experience and the experiences that Dr. Kumar sits with in an ordinary landscape of violence, women and women in Guyana. And recently published by Rutgers University Press, Kumar examines the various forms of violence that women and women confront daily in both urban and rural communities here in Georgetown and in Boogies. And Kumar illustrates how societal, familial, religious expectations shape the experiences of these women across race, class, gender, sexuality, and geographic location. She highlights the pervasive violence that often accompanies the relationships that these women form with others, with whom they share physical, emotional, psychological, and sexual energies with. And this really important analysis is grounded in the concept of ordinary violence. This really powerful concept that helps us to explore how individuals navigate state structures while negotiating and even absorbing the residual effects of the ordinary everyday violence that they confront. And in the book, Kumar provides some really important models for us to understand how violence manifests. She does so from describing the impact of violence and really emphasizes the urgency in addressing it. The book opens by establishing Guyana's racially and politically charged environments and how these environments create fertile ground for fear, distrust, and even suspicion among people and between the state and citizens. This atmosphere Kumar finds is profoundly impacting the intimate relationships that these women maintain, and it really, again, influences how they navigate and negotiate and even resist these structures. And she spends time providing really important and rich historical context to really show us how legacies, for instance, of enslavement, indentureship, and so forth, serve to continue policing gender and sexual expression while controlling how women-loving women perceive themselves as sexual, spiritual, and social beings. And what I find really important with this work is that Kumar makes a really necessary contribution to the scholarship, which has typically focused on, in the Caribbean, has typically largely focused on urban settings and predominantly on gay men or trans women. So it's really important. This piece of work focusing on women-loving women communities in the Caribbean makes a really important contribution to the limited scholarship that is growing. And her attention to her own Bodies offers a refreshing perspective on this understudied demographic right here in Guyana. And then she investigates the various spaces that influence women's ability to embrace their queerness fully. And these include family structures that uphold notions of respectability, within a patriarchal framework, also societal expectations around marriage, motherhood, and domesticity that often prove unattainable for many working class women. Kumar really challenges readers to confront the uncomfortable truths about love and violence, while inspiring hope for a future where individuals can embrace their desires without fear or shame. And Kumar's book concludes on a really sobering note that offers this concept of still life, to suggest that, to quote Kumar in the book, a momentary pause, a quietness, a temporary slowing down of pace, place, and time to witness life as it unfolds. And she invites us as readers to sit with the women, loving women she interviewed and really engaged with, help community with, to carefully contemplate how violence often leads to profound emotional struggles that sometimes manifests in suicidal ideation, self-harm, and depression. And we know that in the Caribbean, and particularly in Guyana, this is a really important issue for us to attend to and continue talking about. Guyana being labeled by many international organizations as the suicide capital of the world. And as Kumar acknowledges, there's no quick fix for addressing the kinds of ordinary violence that we see women communities, queer communities, even us, as we navigate these structures. There's no quick fix for these things. And as she writes, this book is no utopia. Thus, we must find new and creative ways to negotiate violence and simultaneously imagine a different life, even if it is paid with injuries. But what is refreshing as well in this book is that readers begin to find these hopeful memories and these hopeful moments as we go through all the emotions, the range of emotions, as we sit with this book. And we see glimpses of what remedies can look like in the ways that these women form community. They are carving out spaces of living in Guyana that often offer us lessons of hope and inspiration for a better life outside of the confines of violence. And in this context of relentless violence, then, Kumar's spirit and those of the participants endure. So I just want to reiterate, I'm so excited to share this day with Dr. Kumar and celebrate, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Preity, to just reflect and let's take our book, let's celebrate and hold space together.
Thank you so much for that. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Or do I need the mic?
Need the mic.
I need the mic. Okay. Thank you, Nikoli, for that really wonderful and insightful reflection on my work. When I hear people talk about my work, I'm like, whoa, did I write that? Is that what I did? You know, because it feels very surreal for me. So thank you so much for those kind words. I want to start by also saying thank you to Joel for organizing this event and putting together everything, and the continuous work he's been doing here on the ground while we are also abroad. And to Maureen House for letting us use the space, and to all of you for being here and giving me your time to hear me talk. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Dr. Kumar A, who's here with us today, and I took one course with her as a master's student at York University in Toronto. I was a business major. I thought I was going to work in an event. And here I am as a professor, all because of one course with one person. So knowledge is very powerful, so I want to acknowledge and thank you for being here. It's just like full circle for me to come back, and my professors here and all my colleagues and so on. So thank you for being here and joining me, but to do so solely a time dedicated to standing against anti-bullying and showing support for the LGBT community today. What I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about some insights from the book, but I'm first going to walk you through how I arrived at this project, and I'm going to provide a few stories from the women that I interviewed both in Berbice and Georgetown. And I want to say also the stories that I'm providing are really snapshots. They're pictures, right? It's not their complete lives. These are stories from a particular moment, at a particular day that I interviewed. So what I do with the stories in the book is that I take the stories and then connect them to whether the state structures that we have in place in Guyana, or whether it's the religious ideologies in place, or whether it's the cultural of patriarchal understandings of femininity and womanhood. So I connect these stories for us to see how the women's lives are very much impacted, and these ideas materialize in their lives as well. So I arrived in Guyana in 2015. I'm ready to start my fieldwork, and my project was really about community making. I was very interested in how the women form communities, what were their spaces of hanging out, socializing, how did they network with each other, and more importantly at that time I was very curious about what do the women think about LGBT rights as human rights. And we see a lot of that breakdown in the mainstream LGBT community. A lot of the conversation is centered around civil rights and legal rights, which is very much necessary and needed. But do those words mean anything to the lives of women? Okay. So I was intellectually curious about community making and rights discourse. But beneath this desire was a far more personal one. For me, as a young woman, as a young child who left Berbice, I wanted to know if I had continued to live in Guyana, how would my life have unfolded here as a third wife. And maybe it was selfish for me to seek out their stories in search of my own. Maybe it was selfish to kind of let these ethical principles guide my research, but what I realized over time is that I could have never told my own stories, and they could never tell their own stories without each other. So it's really about how all of our stories came together. So as I encountered alternate course of my research, where I started to think about the landscape and violence in the lives of women in a way that felt deeply affected. I arrived in Georgetown prepared to do fieldwork, and I arranged to stay at an apartment with a family friend. When traveling back to Guyana, as many of you know, I figured it would be safer as a young woman, to stay with a mutual neighbor or family that someone knew. And when I arrived, the neighbor immediately from down the street pulled me aside, and she started telling me a story about my landlord, the person I would go on to rent a flat from, how his first wife had disappeared into the bush with a black man. So, and we all know the bush is Guyana's interior, right? And I was like, okay, so we have a country marked by decades of ethnically political driven violence between Afro and Indo-Guyanese. So the emphasis of Bavita, her name was Bavita, ran away with the black man in the bush was the ultimate act of defiance in her community, according to this neighbor. So Bavita not only ran away with the bush, she also abandoned her 4-year-old son at that point in time. I was like, okay, thanks for the information, right? So I kind of like listened in silence and took it in, but I wasn't sure what the point of the story is. So I moved into my apartment that evening. I met my landlord, Anna Narayan, and he lived below me in his flat with his second wife, an indigenous woman, and now their 2 child. So he was short, brown, very much friendly with me, and every week he would come in to clean my apartment. And I did a thing that I still cannot quite make sense of or cannot translate into word how I felt about him. He left me feeling very discomfort, uncomfortable, and it got to the point where I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow because I don't know why I did it in that moment. I just did it instinctively. And I often dismiss that behavior as paranoia of a young woman, and maybe there's some ways in which all of us have felt similar experiences. But I never allowed myself to be alone with him. I remember very clearly I would invite his wife out to make conversation or be on the balcony with us. And at the same time, what I understand upon reflection is that I was also navigating kind of a landscape and a space with him myself. And maybe in some ways, the Creole way we would say this is the Bishada na Tekyo, right? So I continued to do my field work for 6 months, went to Berbice, and interviewed 33 women, 9 from Berbice, and 24 from Georgetown. And most of it took place in Georgetown, and I would often sit on my balcony and retranscribe the interviews and listen. But beneath my balcony was a sewer where human waste and household activities, the dirty water flows into the abandoned yard. So I became very captivated not only by how noisy Georgetown was, but also about this filth and decay that I started thinking about a lot, and I don't know why. I went back to Toronto in 2016 for a quick visit, and my mother, of course, reads the Southern newspaper every day, and she says to me, "Isn't this your address in Georgetown?" And I was like, "What?" So my mom saw the address, the police had raided my apartment, had carried out a search, and beneath my balcony was the remains of Babita Sarju. The woman did not run away to the bush with a black man. The woman did not abandon her son. She tried to make a different life. She had filed several reports according to the newspaper to leave her marriage and to seek employment and get legal custody of her son. So this project starts with her. That's how I shifted focus and came to violence. I never set out to do a project on violence. It came to me. This project was dedicated to her, and while I was busy doing my interviews, I realized a larger story is waiting for me to be told. So, sorry, I lost my page. In writing this book, I came to realize that this landscape of violence was effective. And what I mean by that is that how do we experience a violence that is felt but we cannot name? How do we talk about the violences that are invisible? So in this book, you will see me asking questions about what would it mean for us to think about violence beyond the physical, beyond the visible, beyond the spectacular. What would it mean to think of violence already embedded in the landscape that we're part of, or spaces that we're part of, and already present in our relationship, rather than a singular event? And more importantly, I ask, how does violence continue after the act has ended? What is the residual harm of that violence that we have experienced that stays with us? So you'll see me asking these questions throughout the book. In 2019, for example, Guyana Women's Health and Life Experiences Survey indicated that 55% of all Guyanese women ages 15 to 64 have experienced at least one form of violence. For a country of less than half a million, the United Nations report that Guyana has the highest rate of femicide in the Caribbean region, and that 85% of Guyanese women are often murdered by an intimate partner or a family member. But of course, none of these stories ask if they're queer or not. So let me share two stories. Boy, it's hot. Let me share two stories with you from the book to demonstrate my point of the kind of social violence I'm talking about. Rebecca is a young woman. She is a short Indo-Guyanese woman in her 20s at the time of this research. She lives in a village in low purpose. Her life is, in my book, marked by a series of contradictions. On the community, on the surface level, she goes to her mandir, she does fundraising, she attends services every weekend, and she does volunteering. So to most of our eyes, she appears to be thriving. But she was disowned by her family because of her sexuality and her desire to also live with a much older woman. So she finds herself extremely isolated from the very people who should be supporting her. But Rebecca's relationship is far from the sanctuary she told. She has become financially dependent on her partner. Her freedom and movements are tightly controlled and regulated. What has begun as a relationship of love has now become one of control and manipulation. So we see in the book, I theorize how this form of social violence is the violence that we're not talked about or seen. She has told me how, like her partner, like locks her in the room sometimes in the evenings if the partner, if she wants to go out, but the partner doesn't want her to go out. But because she's not out the way we think of being out, and she has no support and financially dependent on this partner, we see how this psychological violence is taking a toll on Rebecca's sense of independence and self-worth. This form of violence, silent, invisible, and constant, highlights that violence is not always physical. The abuse Rebecca experiences is psychological and financial, trapping her in a life that limits her choices and constrains her spirit. There's another story I would like to share. Maya, an Amerindian woman in her 30s, and I quote, and in the quote she's talking about her partner. Quote, she started getting jealous. We started getting together out of convenience. She thought that because she was mostly the provider and when we were together, so if I go out to come home late, she would lock me into and stuff. It's kind of hard for me because my parents weren't accepting of me. I was alone. She was my only option. This went on for 5 years as I was studying. We were having sex, but I'm not really sure what happened. I'm not really sure if that's what I wanted. I was very young and didn't have a job. She would threaten to destroy my things. She would even threaten to kill the dogs and burn my stuff. And that was it. One day I just had enough. To confront these unforeseen harms, I introduced the concept of affective violence in my book as a lens through which we can understand the non-physical dimensions of violence that leaves no bruises but still shapes women's life. This violence, as I show in the book, are the emotions, the feelings, and energies that persist long after the violence has ended. I show how affective violence works quietly, like slow poison, taking rooted fear and blooming through shame and binding through emotional manipulation, much like in Rebecca and Maya's story. It is violence that whispers, not shouts, but its impact is no less devastating. So as we stand here on Spirit Day, a day dedicated to resisting bullying and supporting LGBTQ youth, I hope the two stories, it's just a glimpse, that I've shared kind of bring into focus the complex, often hidden forms of violence that shape women's life in Guyana. The resilience of women like Rebecca and Maya is a testament to the ways in which poor women are navigating this landscape of violence. So, an ordinary landscape of violence is not interested in a redemptive narrative of LGBTQ liberation in the lives of these women. Instead, it articulates violence as an ordinary occurrence, but it also examines intimacy, survival, and love within the lives of these women in ordinary ways. Picture a little Burmese, a woman, Jasmine, who is 40, has already exchanged rings with her partner in quiet defiance, never waiting for legal papers or state recognition to legitimize her love. As a Muslim woman, Jasmine takes care of her elder parents next door to the house. She's watching her son grow up and she's nurturing a home she has built with a Hindu partner. And her family knows. Their bond, inner faith, and poor exist within the daily rituals of life. Take Amanda, another 30-something-year-old mixed woman, who's taking care of her children and her partner's children in a small village in Burmese. Together, they're raising 4 kids, have Sunday line at 63 Beach, which is common for Burmesians to do, and in some ways, they are carving out their own landscape in Burmese. Whereas in Georgetown, you will see women have made their own private heavens. They have built their own chosen family, loving without legal recognition and rights, and spending afternoons together by the seawall. And so, in the book, I suggest that if violence is ordinary, love can be ordinary and political when it challenges and defies the constraints imposed by a broader system. In everyday acts of affection, connection, shared meals, community gatherings, and child rearing, these women assert their humanity and agency in the face of these stories of violence. This theater of the ordinary is also a powerful site of personal and political expression, where these women craft their own private revolutions. And I think this is one of the key points I try to make in the book, that not all acts of resistance need to be visible. It doesn't need to be spectacular or public. Their everyday lives, spaces, and love are quiet yet powerful forms of resistance, affirming their desire to exist and their right to thrive in spite of the landscape of violence. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kumar and Dr. Attai, for the introduction. At this point, we will take any questions you may have for Dr. Kumar about her book, about anything she just said. I would especially like to give the media the first opportunity to ask their questions, and then we'll open it up to our wonderful audience that we have here. My colleague Dr. has an extra mic. If you could just share your name and identify you in the house. I recognize the gentleman at the back, Jeff here, down to the back. Yeah, we're coming to you.
I'll speak loud enough. Good morning.
For the live stream.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Dr. Grant, to start, please. Can you say where persons can get this book and what is the price?
Sorry?
Where can persons purchase the book and what is the price?
So you can purchase it directly on Rutgers University Press or through Amazon, but I would encourage you to support Rutgers Press instead of Amazon. And it's listed for 30 US, but if you use the code RUP30, you get 30% off. And there is a link as well that you can scan to just purchase the book.
And there's some copies.
Oh, yeah, that part. I was just going to add that we have copies here, a limited number of copies, just 10 copies for a special price of only $5,000, which is less than you pay online, and you don't have to pay for shipping and all that. And on top of that, Dr. Kumar is right here to sign and autograph your copy for you. So it could get better than that. So right here today.
Yeah, forgot we had copies.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
TVG? Yeah, we're coming to you with the mic. The mic is more for the live stream, right? Yeah.
Hi there, everyone.
Yeah.
Is that any Guyana time? I would like to know, I know currently right now in the school system in Guyana, there are a lot of efforts being led to have children reading and writing more. Especially there's quite an emphasis on reading. Is there any effort that is going to be put in place so that the schools could have these books? I know in the last meeting as well, there was a high emphasis on reforming children's mindsets into letting them become more efficient adults when it comes to these topics, hate speech, violence against women, etc. Is there any efforts going to be put in place so that these books could be into the schools, etc.?
I think there should be. I think at that level, we need to start with a lot of gender-neutral language, having programs that recognizes gender and sexual differences. And those are not categories to be afraid of or, ways of expressing yourself. I think one of the things we see in children is that when they express something that deviates from the norm of masculinity or femininity, we police them ourselves, right? We police our own children, and parents are doing that work. So I think it needs to start one in the family, but definitely we need programs to expose children to gender and sexual diversity, and that exists in our Creole language as well, so it doesn't need to be seen as a foreign thing. I know in Trinidad, for example, I'm working on a grant there where we got some money to do a workshop with young boys from age, I think, 8 to 12 around sensitization and around gender-based violence with young boys starting at that age. Because once you reach a certain level, it's hard to undo some of that harm that has been worn as well. So I think that's a great question, and we should definitely be having more conversations with community members and our government, right? So thank you. But yeah, I'm collaborating with you. Joel's reminding me that I'm starting to collaborate with UG right now, the Institute for Gender Studies, and hopefully we will develop that program, and that will be accessible to university students.
I recognize the reports at the back where the doctor is bringing the mic to.
Hi, Kimberly Giddings from NCN News. Kimberly Giddings from NCN News. I'd just like to know if there will be any collaboration between SASAD and the Ministry of Education and also Prison Services, since it's kind of
I think this is a question for SASA.
We always have collaborations with the government. I think we're still at a place where we're distilling the findings. We just got copies of the book on Monday. It was just published like at the end of July, so it's still very, very new. And so I think we're still trying to figure out how to action some of the findings. One of the things that I can tell you, particularly because you asked about education that we will be doing next year, and this great news just came in this week. We collaborated with Professor Tavis Jules at Loyola University and Dr. Karen Naidu, who is another one of Professor Campbell's doctoral students from Europe, to do research next year looking at anti-gender violence and how in schools and how it affects LGBTQ teachers and students. And I think that's going to be a very important study for us to get information about what's really happening in schools around this kind of bias violence. And we don't have a lot of information, right? We just document reports and we hear about incidents and so on. But we also need to dive into that a little bit more about why is anti-gender violence manifesting itself in the school system, where not only LGBTQ students are finding themselves as victims, but we've seen on occasion where LGBTQ teachers themselves have suffered from this violence. In the case of Sasa, we have our own members who's a teacher in recent years that became a victim to this violence, and it was reported widely in the press. So yes, to that collaboration with the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Human Services and Social Security, but we also have a duty to go to that conversation with real research, with real information, and not just anecdotes. Right. I recognize I go Watson from Capital News, and then I will come back to my colleague from Sabbath News.
Yes, what I'd like to ask is, what measures would you like to see, this is for Kumar and Dr. Kumar, what specific measures you would like to see put in place to address domestic violence in the queer community and also in the general LGBT community? Because I know that lots of persons will say that we have systems in place to address domestic violence on the whole, but how do we deal with domestic violence in LGBT community?
You know, I think about that question a lot, right? And I don't have a complete answer, but I'll tell you what I think. I think there needs to be, one, there is a cultural shift happening where more and more families are realizing and understanding that their kids might be gay or queer, whatever identity you want to use. But I think one of the things I saw is that when members were cut off from their family and social circle, they are pushed into further situations that kind of breeds that violence. So if there's family and community structure for folks in the community, I think that is one way in which we could address that. But on the other hand, it's also about working with LGBTQ people to recognize the ways in which we also embody violence and the ways in which we perpetrate it in our intimate relationships, right? And that means when I was doing this research, for example, the woman I talked about, Rebecca, she attempted suicide 3 times. And when she went to the hospital, the nurse said to her, "You couldn't even kill yourself properly." Right? So she was seen as this person who has no problems in the world. What could be a reason for attempting suicide? But nobody knew about the circumstance and her living situation with the woman, right? And she couldn't tell them that because it's also Burmese and it's a different space, right? So I think that there's a cultural piece, a state piece, there's an intimate partner piece, there's a family piece, and those are all the pieces that we need to work on in our respective position, or however we are in society as civil members and citizens of Guyana, whether we are teachers, whether we are a nurse, whether I'm a professor, whether you're a doctor, how are we engaging with people who show up with concerns. Another thing I found during the research, and maybe this has changed and somebody can correct me, at the time there's 5 psychologists in Guyana. 3 were private and in Georgetown, and the other 2 were public, but I think they were also in Georgetown. There was not one psychologist in Burmese at the time of this research. Not one mental health counselor. But there was over 300 temple mosques and churches over in Guyana, right? And it's an interesting thing about also what kinds of services and cultural investment is this what we're investing in Guyana. We are seeing lost. Like, I mean, I wrote a chapter on religion, the role that religion plays in the lives of these women, and I was very stunned to find that we have more places of worship than mental health services, right? So when we think about investment, we also have to think about this economic piece as well. So yeah, that's kind of what I think.
I want to add one other layer to what Dr. Kumar said, and I agree with everything she said about intervening at the individual, community, societal levels. I think there's also an institutional piece around legislation, which is very important for us at SASA Guyana, that we need to be inclusive when it comes to legislation that sanctions violence. And one very current example that I want to share is the Protection from Harassment Bill 2023, which has been drafted and circulated for consultation by the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. In partnership with Sexualities, Women and Gender, SWAG, we made a very comprehensive submission recommending that harassment is also defined to include targeting people based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression. So LGBTQ people also find protection from sexual and other forms of harassment within that legislation. I think that's also very important because we need to signal to people that they can go to the police, they can go to the constitutional commissions, they can go to the ombudsman, they can go to all the national mechanisms that exist for the redress of injustice and violence, and that they are included. And what we often find in Guyana is that we're doing just the opposite, right? We still have legislation on the books which criminalizes intimacy between men, and then the rest of the legislation around family violence and so on is silent about the existence of sexual and gender minorities and their inclusion and about how they're protected from these forms of violence. So I think there's a legislative piece as well that we need to be deliberately and targetedly inclusive in our legislation to protect people from violence. Yeah, I recognize the colleague from Starbuck News. I'm going to take all the media questions first and then open up to the audience, if you don't mind. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Just one other question. You spoke to the collaborations with the MOE and so on, but can you give some details of the collaboration? Would it be in terms of educating students in schools on the LGBT community, or would it be allowing collaborations to allow those students to live their lives freely and identify as LGBTQ persons in schools and so on? And if it is that it's just education and so on, can you say how soon these programs would start? Would you be going to the schools anytime soon to educate the students? What would you do?
It's related to the project that I announced. I can't tell you about all the actions that we will take because we're starting first with the research. But one of the activities that we're projecting to do, even within the research project, is sensitizing teacher educators. We especially need to work with faculty in the School of Education, University of Guyana, the Sir Potter College of Education, and sensitize the teachers that are coming out to these issues. And we plan to roll out a series of trainings with these kinds of stakeholders around these issues: anti-gender violence, restorative justice. And I think that's a very important part of it, that education stakeholders have the capacity to address these issues. I remember maybe just about a couple of years ago, the Minister of Education reaching out and engaging around sensitization of the school counselors. We haven't been able to bring that to fruition yet, but I think it signals that there is a willingness or at least an awareness that there is a problem and that stakeholders need to be sensitized. We are starting to have more school counselors in the system, and I think that's a very important piece because we can't expect teachers to do the work of psychologists and counselors. That's not within their job description. So we appreciate that this is a multi-sectoral effort, and while we project that there's some activities that we need to start with at a systemic level, I can't really go further to say that we'll be doing X, Y, Z in schools because we don't have that access and we don't have that control. Those are proposals that will stem from a research that we will have to put to the Ministry of Education and see if they're accepted.
Can I add one part to this collaboration? I know your question was around education with children, but I think a huge part from the women I interviewed, if they did show up, one of the women indicated she would go to the police to report her female partner abusing her. And his response was, can I join you guys? So, you know, we need the legislative piece, but we also need the piece around how people, you could have legislation on the book, which is absolutely necessary, but then how are they being enforced? How do they manifest in people's lives? And how are women generally engaging with patriarchy and people in positions of power and authority, where those who should be supporting them and protecting them are the ones who are also causing that violence. So thinking through all of these parts are essential as well.
Very important part, the issue of accountability, and I'm reflecting on that after we just did training with police just last week, Tuesday, in Georgetown with the current batch of police who are going to graduate at the end of October, and then we were in Essequibo on Friday, training police on gender, sexuality, and policing. So very relevant. I'm going to take the question now from Andre Gonzalez. He's very anxiously can't wait to ask this question.
Thank you. And the reason being is because Kimberly raised it initially, then Starbuck News elaborated on it. And it is a very good question as it relates to, you just mentioned it, restorative practices in the classroom, which is a partnership between Ministry of Education and the Restorative Justice Center. Currently, they're training guidance and counselors. So my question would have been, what role can you play at this point, since the training has started just Monday, to at least equip with the guidance and counselors with the wherewithal to address these issues that is prevalent exist in the school system? Thank you.
Yeah. Andre, that's a sneaky question because Andre didn't even introduce himself. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Rights of the Child Commission, one of Guyana's constitutional commissions, and he's also the Vice Chairperson of the Board of Directors of SASA Guyana. So I should throw that question back at you. Since clearly you have a lot of influence where this is concerned, we really know about the training, and on Thursday, if it started on Monday, it's probably too late for this current training week. But I think we're very open to collaborating with your Constitutional Commission, with all the others. We have a good relationship as well with the Women and Gender Equality Commission. The CEO, Renata Chakasang, is also a former board chair of SASA. And we're very open to these partnerships. And we could come in at any time and add the specialist training around how restorative justice practices and so on intersect with these issues of sexual rights and gender justice. So we're happy to collaborate on that and to talk to you after the panel that you're on after today's break. I will continue to, unless my colleagues on the media have any more questions, I would open it up to the rest of the audience. I wanted to give the medium first bite. I recognize Her Excellency Jane Miller Jaffier in the front. Maybe I could just pass the mic to you, Madam Shorter. Answer your question.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. I will be buying one of those books. I really look forward to reading it, and I'm sorry for being a little bit late. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And I'd like to congratulate you for this. We know that there is stigma and discrimination against people LGBT throughout the world and in Guyana. But one of the things that is diminishing or reducing that stigma is breaking the silence on it. And a book like this creates a debate, creates discussion. It gets people starting to talk about LGBT issues. And that is what will begin to end discrimination and stigma. But my question to you is, since you published the book, have you personally had any stigma, discrimination, have people said things to you, either in Guyana or family, as a result of the book? But thank you. Huge congratulations.
Well, family. I'll say complicated, question mark. My mother is a Guyanese woman after all, it's a working relationship. My personal family have, it was difficult, but again, it's the exposure and conversations that I keep having. So, have I had any stigma? I don't know. I haven't. I mean, I've experienced things again during my field work. I experienced things more so as a woman walking on the streets, and then that kind of gender-based social violence, right? Women, when you're walking on the streets, men whistling and calling you, it becomes exhausting, right? That's the social violence. But I don't. That violence is not necessarily grounded in me being queer, because maybe I don't get read as such. But there are different levels, there are different spaces where I enter, and that has happened. There are different communities I've engaged with, and comments and remarks were made. But you take it and you move on and you keep going, right? So,
As a result of the books.
as a result of the book, well, the book just came out in July, and this is the first talk I'm doing. It's here at UG and at SASA and at one of my home institutions. So,
do you want to mention the Freddie comment about the publicity?
could you talk a little bit about it then? Freddie Kissoon's comment on I'm here promoting lesbianism. So, but I don't really read those things and engage. But I think there was an op-ed just 2 days ago that LGBT personality is here to promote lesbianism. Yes. So you can see that. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. I guess, or I'll be seeing it after this book, maybe, when I'm done this conversation.
I'm going to do 5 articles.
But thank you for that. Yes.
Thank you. So congratulations again. I think this is an excellent and very necessary discussion. Most importantly, I was happy to hear you mention that you covered religion in your book. And I think just from my limited knowledge of current data, I think one of the big stumbling blocks is the way our religious community looks at these issues. And therefore, I think it's just so necessary that, we engage the police, we are engaging education. But as you yourself say, there's so many churches and temples, and that's where a lot of the messaging comes from, especially within family structures. So I'm curious, I think this may more be for Joel and Sasor. What attempts are we specifically making to discuss this issue with the religious community?
Happy to have that question, because it's actually a very a priority focus of the current work that we're doing this quarter. We have a short project that is expressly focused on faith, and we're actually in the consultative phase where we're talking to religious leaders about what the issues are. One of the things that we have heard is from the potential allies that we've reached out to is that we don't know the language, we need training and sensitization if you want us to speak out and speak in favor. We're quiet allies, but we don't want to offend anybody with the wrong terms, wrong pronouns, and all these kinds of things and so on. So we're embarking on this phase, particularly with a focus on people who are saying, yeah, I'm an ally, but I haven't had an opportunity to speak out on a public platform. So we're consulting them about what they need to learn, and then we're designing a training program specifically for faith leaders to sensitize them. And then by the end of the year, there's a plan to have a big splash with faith leaders who are going to specifically call for decriminalization of same-sex intimacy, which is one of our legislative targets. I think we've been doing the work with faith leaders over the last 2 decades in different ways. As part of our Pride festivities, there's often an interfaith forum, and we've rotated the host institution. We've had the Catholic Church, the Anglican Bishop, the Presbyterian Church, and so forth and so on. But we recognize the need, particularly to work deeper, and we're going to start with a focus on Christianity and Hinduism, just as a start, because there are large numbers there. And then we're going to broaden that, I think, next year to look at some of the smaller religious communities and work with them specifically as well. Any other questions from our audience, media? Otherwise, I recognize my colleague from TVG, and then I will take it to Andrew Kendall. Jackie, is that mic working? Could share with the colleague there.
I don't know if you all will be in the right capacity to answer as yet, obviously, but something stood out to me when the lady over there pointed out the editorial by Mr. Kissoon that would have targeted you. Obviously, you wouldn't have no, power, that he probably just did that, I don't know what reason. But in the long-term sense of things, if youths are in the capacity of learning more about being themselves, etc., and then the possibilities of persons targeting them, just like how Mr. Kissoon would have done, what strategies are you all foreseeing to put in place? Because obviously, if you with age, etc., the younger ones will be easier susceptible to any kind of forms of violence if they try to express their sexuality, etc. So what forms of strategies would you all seek to put in place?
Well, full disclosure, I haven't read the column, nor do I ever read it.
Somebody sent it to me.
Right, so I wasn't aware of it until today, but I think I deal with the overarching issue as opposed to that particular personality. I think when it comes to the issue of hate speech, like we mentioned, also the issue of hate crimes, one of the avenues that we have for engagement and redress, I think, are the constitutional commissions. I know the Ethnic Relations Commission is dealing particularly with the issue of hate speech, but we also have a particularly good and strong working relationship with the Rights of the Child Commission and the Women and Gender Equality Commission. And there are opportunities there for documentation and investigation of complaints. Those bodies have investigative capacity, authority under the Constitution, and also staff who are trained, qualified, and so on to do that, and to recommend particular sanctions within the confines of the law to deal with those specific issues. So our starting point is always to use the national mechanisms that exist within the country. In addition to that, international mechanisms also exist, and we're using them when we need to use them. One I will share is that on November 15th, on Friday, November 15th, the Guyana Equality Forum, which SASA Guyana, Blossom Inc., and the Guyana Sex Work Coalition are members of, and I identify those three organizations because they are the spokespersons for this particular hearing. We're having a thematic hearing at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights on the impacts of gender violence affecting migrant sex workers and trans women. And that is deliberately in response to some of the murders that we've seen this year of trans women, sex workers, migrant sex workers, and there's a common thread within those murders around gender and how it affects particularly marginalized women. So we're also utilizing those international mechanisms, and that's coming up next month on November 15th, and we have a delegation of 4 persons who will be traveling to DC for that. The other thing that I could mention is for people at the individual level, our clients, we always encourage people to come to us and report discrimination for several reasons. Some people come to us and said, well, I'm telling you so that you could document it, so you could use it for statistics, research, and your advocacy and so on, but I have very little interest in engaging the police or any other authority because I feel like I will get re-stigmatized in that process. I will have to go and identify as being gay or trans or queer or whatever, and I feel like stigma starts again, like I'm re-stigmatized there. But I will tell you that for documentation and research purposes. And then also, we have people who might want to use more informal mechanisms, which we support very quietly. So we have a pro bono lawyers program with about 9 lawyers who are interested in human rights and who provide pro bono service to our clients once they have suffered a human rights violation. And this is regardless of if it's men, women, LGBTQ people. When it comes to issues affecting children, we collaborate with Blossom Inc. and Child Rights in particular, and so forth, victims of or survivors of gender-based violence. And we have no cap on what kind of human rights violation we're talking about. And we've had some quiet successes where we've intervened with private companies and both state agencies, particularly in the context of employment discrimination, where we just sat quietly in conference rooms and boardrooms and worked out a particular problem that an employee has had. And there's no, naming and shaming and public castigation and so on, because some people just want to quietly continue with their jobs, earn, not be fired, not face discrimination and work, and sometimes that's the most effective way to go. But what that means is that never gets into the formal system of being reported as an act of discrimination. It might never reach the Ministry of Labor or so forth and so on, but we document it internally, and then we publish and contribute to a larger regional database that publishes about human rights violations in the region. Any other questions? I think I'll take the last one here because I'm being signaled that we are running out of time for this first part of the program.
It's not a question, it's more just wanting to remind the organizations and the representatives here that, and I'm saying this with my parliamentary member of parliament hat, we still have not had our Human Rights Commission established in Guyana through the parliament. And it means that a lot of the protections that could be given to individuals are not possible. And so again, we need help to have more organizations and more people speaking out and demanding that this commission is established. It's in our constitution. So it's just a plea. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think that's a very good note to take a break. So I think we will take just about 13 minutes and reconvene at 11:20. We have some